Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to Snippy 2025, first event of the day. Today we will have Dr. Simeon Hein. He is a multifaceted man with expertise spanning sociology, remote viewing, and subtle energy sciences. Dr. Hein holds a PhD in sociology from Washington State University, where he previously taught research methodology. He is the author of many books, including Opening Minds, A Journey of Extraordinary Encounters, Crop Circles, and Resonance. A book I was fortunate to receive from Simeon when I met him at this event last year. I thoroughly enjoyed having his book on my flights home and would highly recommend it to anybody with inquiring minds. Today's talk on ball lightning should be rather enjoyable, and without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Simeon Hein.
Hey, well, thanks very much, Eric. Thanks, everyone, for being here this morning, bright and early. It's really great to be back again this year. My first contact with this region was with a small conference in Crestone that was held by Chris O'Brien and Steve Greer. It was a joint conference between the two. Sherry Adamak was there, and one of Chris's co-authors, and that was my introduction to this area and the mysterious valley and all of the strange phenomena. This is shortly after I became involved with remote viewing, and I just saw that there was a conference down here. So I've known about this area for about, I think that was in 98, almost 30 years now. So as you know, these phenomena are really multifaceted. I got started in this area through remote viewing, which led me to this ability that we all have to perceive non-local information and describe it accurately. That was originally a classified DOD, CIA program in the 70s to create psychic spies. And it really just started with that for me, but it was kind of like a gateway drug to lots of other phenomena, because these phenomena overlap. In science, we're used to sort of separating topics and keeping them sort of hermetically sealed from other disciplines and so forth. But it doesn't really work with this area, as you know, because one sort of topic leads to the next. It's called overlapping phenomenology by some ball lightning researchers, is because you cannot keep it sealed out from other phenomena. So let's take a look at ball lightning, a phenomena which is quite paradoxical. You can see this image from a Russian researcher, Nikitin, who has a photograph of ball lightning on snow. Now, normally we associate glowing objects with heat, but one of the paradoxes of ball lightning, which has been studied for over 100, maybe 200 years, going back, I believe, to Francois Arago in 1823 in France. It's been studied for so long, and yet it's remained on the margins of science because it's so hard to understand. So let's take a look at the paradoxes of ball lightning, all the different facets, the government research into ball lightning, where ball lightning shows up, and why I think it's so relevant to these different phenomena. So we usually define ball lightning as a free-floating fireball. It's thought to be the basis of geological activity, even volcanoes, alchemical transmutation of elements, something we were all taught in school was some sort of fantasy of the Middle Ages. Even Isaac Newton spent half his time on alchemy, as we know. It occurs near thunderstorms. It definitely is associated with thunderstorms, but it can be associated with blue, clear skies. It can come out of nowhere. And as we're going to show here today, it exists microscopically at a very tiny level, even making contact with the quantum realm, which is what makes it so interesting. It's also potentially dangerous. It can injure animals and people and even be fatal. So just a caution there. I want us to just start with the idea that we think we see the reality around us. But what I want to argue today, especially with the topic of ball lightning, is that our perception is limited to the frequencies that our sense organs can perceive. And an example of that from the work of Gerald Pollack at UW in Seattle, if you've looked at his work on the fourth phase of water, is that this is what heated water looks like in the infrared spectrum. It has this mosaic pattern. Your eyes don't see this. You just see the water heating up and eventually bubbling. But this is what it looks like to an infrared tuned camera. It's got a mosaic pattern. So this just shows us that there's aspects to reality that we don't see that are around us all the time. And he's written about this in his excellent book, The Fourth Phase of Water, which shows that water has a semi-crystalline phase between liquid and solid that explains a lot of the paradoxes of water. For example, why heated water freezes faster than cold water, and why water has this ability to kind of stick together and form clouds which float, which normally you would expect because they're heavy to kind of come down to earth. And the book and his research is full of these paradoxes. So the point is, if we don't even understand water, which we're so familiar with, and we just kind of all assume, well, science must understand everything about water by this time. How do we know we don't even understand the other objects and phenomena that are around us every day? Okay? Another example of this, you've probably seen photos of the way bees see flowers. They see all sorts of information in the ultraviolet range that we don't see. And that guides them to different flowers and gives them information about flowers. So my point is, actually, we don't know very much about the reality around us because we're basing it too much on our sense organs. Ball lightning has been experienced for hundreds of years, thousands of years. We have these woodcuts from books of old showing ball lightning coming down chimneys, which is one way it often appears, coming through windows. This is one of the features of ball lightning, is that it goes through solid objects. One of the famous examples is Professor Richman in Moscow, who was attempting to replicate one of Benjamin Franklin's electricity experiments with lightning, and a ball lightning came down through the apparatus and killed him. So this may be one reason why people have been hesitant to study ball lightning, is some of the first researchers were killed who were looking into it. So ball lightning has a lot of power. It's various estimates as the equivalent of a hand grenade of power, up to 10 times the same volume of TNT when it explodes. So the first thing I want to mention about this is I think we're all suffering from a type of tunnel vision. Trey Hudson and I have been talking about this during the conference. He calls it a normalcy bias. Other researchers, such as Maury King, a cold fusion LENR researcher, says that we're in the flatland slot. You remember that book by Edwin Abbott from the 1880s from the UK, a fictional book about characters who lived in flatland while they're unaware of this three-dimensional world around them. And he kind of wrote it as a satire of Victorian England. But we all live in this type of flatland. And I think one of the reasons is the commercialization of electricity that started about 150 years ago. Electricity, electromagnetism are natural aspects of our environment. They're part of nature. But, starting in about, from the age of Maxwell to our time, there's been an attempt to privatize and commercialize and control electricity, which, became under the rubric of a lot of commercial interests. And you can read more about that in this relatively recent book, Conquering the Electron by Derek Chung, which goes through all the players and the different people that we're familiar with that wanted to kind of channel all of this energy and power of nature into narrow commercial interests, which also included eventually radio and television. So I believe that this limited our whole understanding of nature because it wasn't in the interests of these companies to talk about alternative explanations of electromagnetism and electricity and energy and fusion and things like this, because it was sort of it went against their particular profit models. And what we lost perspective of is this sort of larger fractal universe around us. We became very linearized and started fitting these processes into boxes where they really don't fit. And so we're all kind of suffering from this tunnel vision. I think that's why some of these topics are a little challenging for us to understand, because we look back in history and farther back in history, like we heard from Freddie Silva yesterday, people have been aware of these processes for a long time. And even though we all believe that we're highly educated nowadays from all the school systems we've been part of since we were very young, maybe we've actually lost sight of the bigger picture. There's other reasons that we don't understand a lot about ball lightning. It became part of national security interests, it going back at least to World War II. We know that because of the U.S. government's interest in developing radar and other countries, the UK and so forth, a lot of these topics became classified. Eventually, with regards to the subject of propulsion, we had even more classification, which I'll show you in a moment, around the whole topics of ball lightning and all these related subjects. So we're used to these 3 states of matter, other states of matter beyond solid, liquid, gas, as Rebecca has talked about in some of her talks, which I saw at Cosmic Summit recently over in North Carolina. Plasmas, which we're familiar with. You've all seen the fluorescent light bulbs, neon bulbs. Aurora borealis, plasmas that come from the sun. The largest, the biggest state of matter in the universe is plasmas by more than 99% nebulas and gases, electrified gases. But there's a state of matter beyond plasmas that some people refer to as condensates, coherent matter, focused plasmas. These are plasmas that are self-contained, that have their own magnetic confinement fields, and they exist naturally in nature. And this is what we're going to talk about right here in the talk. So a number of researchers that have looked at ball lightning over the years, you can just see this list. We're not familiar with very many of these names. When I first started studying ball lightning, and this is something I first saw over in the UK looking at crop circles, I've seen some of these balls of light hovering over crop circles and right on the ground. There has been research going on, at least since 1859, but these names were all new to me. It was just so interesting seeing a whole branch of science that no one had I had never read about any of these names, and yet there have been ball lightning conferences for decades, more research in Soviet Union, Russia, than in the US. But even in Soviet Union, Russia, it was considered kind of like fringe science. It was disparaged and so forth. So there have been a lot of researchers in this topic. People have given different names to the phenomena, so it never really coalesced into an area of, a coherent area of study. But here are some of the characteristics of ball lightning. It's often cooler than its surroundings. Unlike hot gases, it seems to be lower in temperature. It does come from thunderstorms much of the time, but often it can appear just in the air by itself. It can melt metal at room temperatures, which suggests a quantum component to it. It can explode as it's reaching the end of its lifespan, which is often from seconds to minutes to days. It can penetrate solid materials, destroy electronics, which I've seen a lot over in the crop circles, even man-made crop circles that we made. We had this electronic destroying effect. Jellification of metals. This is a very interesting aspect of ball lightning. It can instantly turn metals into a type of jelly, which was something that I started thinking about when we heard Joe Spencer giving his account of Snippy the other day. This jellification process. It can cause very sharp cuts in material that look like a laser cut, almost as if something was cut by a scalpel. It can magnetize non-magnetic materials like wood temporarily, which suggests to researchers that ball lightning creates magnetic monopoles, something that Paul Dirac talked about in the late 1920s, the physicist Paul Dirac, which was theorized to exist but had never been seen at that time. And these are not the big magnetic monopole that Dirac thought existed somewhere in the universe. These are sort of temporary magnetic monopoles that show up for a time. And most interestingly about ball lightning, it creates alchemical nucleosynthesis. In other words, it can create any element in the periodic table, which is just another fascinating aspect of it. So let's take a look at some of these. The theories behind it, the ordinary theories, are, first of all, that it's a hallucination. It doesn't really exist. It's something happening in your brain, but we can discount that quickly when groups of people see it simultaneously. We've heard a lot of these things are hallucinations over the years. Even in New Scientist, as recently as 2020, people were writing in letters saying that it's just a hallucination. It's the fun, somehow it's just something your brain's creating it. But I think this picture right there shows you that. I think there's some ball at the end of that lightning striker. Heat, it can be caused by chemicals, electrostatic charges, plasmas, and then the plasma vortex theory, which to me seems the most realistic. We can discount most of these theories because things that are solid, like chemicals or heat-created objects, do not penetrate through solid metal or glass. So a lot of these theories that it's something coming up from lightning striking the soil, silica and silicon vapors, so forth, don't really add up when we see it going through solid objects, which I'll show you pictures of in a second. And then the most recent theory, this just could work, is that it's from another dimension, which is why it's so hard to understand. In other words, we're just seeing a slice of this ball lightning. It's sort of straddling a number of dimensions, where in one of them we're only seeing one aspect of it, which is why it sort of seems to show up and disappear out of nowhere. But here is a photo from a couple of weeks ago on YouTube. I've included the YouTube address. This was seen in Alberta by a couple. You can watch this video. This is just a couple weeks old, and this is the real deal ball lightning. So I think we can discount the hallucination theory. I think we can all see this picture. So I'm told the larger version of this video showed it breaking up into smaller balls, smaller pieces, which ball lightning often does. It started as a small size and then grew to a bigger size. And just you take a photo of this and look at the YouTube video, and you'll see real ball lightning that people experience. Okay. There's also this really interesting website called amaski.com, which is one of these older sites from the 90s. Do you remember the internet in the 90s? These wonderful sites that loaded really quick. Didn't have a lot of graphics, but had a lot of information. Okay, so this is a great site for looking at a lot of interesting phenomena. What I love about this site is they just encourage people to share their ball lightning sightings. And everyone included their email addresses right there in the public. So you can just email them now and say, hey, can I talk to you about your sighting? Some people are still there with their AOL accounts and stuff. I've written to some of these people, some of them for like a long time ago, like 2001, and they write back. It's great. So they're just full of cases like this, hundreds and hundreds of ball lightning cases. We can't prove these are all real, but these seem pretty legit to me. And there's stories of people having their family members killed by ball lightning. We rarely hear about this in the news, but it does happen. They're not all like this, where someone saw ball lightning, came down, and then they explode. This is kind of rare, but there are a lot of very interesting cases, and it just shows you how difficult it is to understand this, because it's, as we say in sociology, it's a hidden event. It's something that people experience, but they don't often talk about because of fear of ridicule and stigma and, what people may think about them. So they generally say, I don't know what it was, but here on this site, Amaska, I encourage you to check it out. So my first introduction to ball lightning was, again, in crop circles. This was the first crop circle I ever saw. As I mentioned when I was introducing Freddie yesterday, I went over, we had some crop circle remote viewing targets. When you're done with a remote viewing session, you want to get your feedback. And no better way to get your feedback than to go visit the site. It could be historic, it could be the pyramids, it could be the Eiffel Tower. In this case, I wanted to go see the crop circles. So this was the first one I saw. It happened to be the very shape I studied in my dissertation at Washington State University about fractal geometry. Fractals being the shapes of nature, of branching structures, of mountain ranges and trees and structures that keep branching and branching, like our cardiovascular system. Just think about the way that our lungs start with these two bronchia and it branches all the way down to smaller and smaller systems that feed oxygen to all the cells in our body. Those are fractal structures. And, you can't completely do that in a field here, but it's sort of a representation of what's called the Koch snowflake, a very kind of well-known fractal shape. And by the way, you all are carrying fractals with you. It's the basis of your cell phone antenna, which is why, a finite space can pick up lots and lots of types of frequencies, fractal antennas. So we're all carrying fractals around us technologically. This is a ball of light that somebody photographed, a German tourist. Now, a bunch of us were on this hill at Woodborough Hill near Alton Barnes, right behind this ball of light. And we were waiting for this person to show up. And he stopped and saw this with his eyes, took a picture. We didn't see it, but it was hovering over a crop circle in a field, a man-made crop circle. We were with the people who had made it. It was Koch and Kyberg who paid the farmer and made these circles, and a science experiment to see if they could communicate with the larger intelligence associated with crop circles. In case, here it is. So this is one that, I've seen these. I wasn't able to pull up the video I took of one, but this is something I've experienced. We call these orbs. I want to attempt to convince you today that all of these phenomena that we call orbs, ball lightning, earthlights, are actually a part of a family of the same phenomenon. You could disagree, but that's what I think is going on here. Now let's take a look at the different researchers that have looked into ball lightning, plasmoids, plasmas. One of them is Winston Bostick. Bostick was this researcher from Stevens Institute of Technology in New Jersey. I think he was also associated with Caltech. And Bostick worked for Department of Energy, attempting to make peaceful uses of fusion energy. After World War II, they wanted to find some peaceful uses for atomic weapons, hydrogen bombs, and so forth. So Bostick was interested in creating propulsion systems from hydrogen bombs, from fusion power. And he created what was called these galaxies in a test tube. That's what they were called. And he believed this was the same process, using this sort of magnetic confinement systems on plasmas to create these star-like galaxy formations, suggesting that even the larger galaxies that were around are created and structured by some of the same processes. So these were galaxies in the test tube. It even made the New York Times, believe it or not. Okay, a physicist creates universe in a test tube. So Winston Bostick is one of the earlier researchers, and he coined the term, I believe he was the one that coined the term plasmoids, which are plasma toroids, vortex plasmas toroids. So this is where the word plasmoids come from. It's from DOE research, actually. And so Bostic created a lot of these patterns in the laboratory, which we believe are a type of ball lightning. Another researcher was Ken Shoulders, who also worked with Hal Puthoff. He originally worked for NSA in microelectronic masking techniques. And I'm told that his technology is what's in all of our phones nowadays, is how to create microelectronics and get it all to work together on a circuit board. But he later went on to work at SRI and worked in this whole area of micro ball lightning, what he initially called strong electrons, electron validium, EVs, later known as exotic vacuum objects, to differentiate them from ordinary materials that we're used to, that are just made of protons, neutrons, and electrons. He wrote a book called EV, A Tale of Discovery, and he was asked to research the work of John Hutchinson, the Canadian researcher that was attempting to replicate Tesla's research and replicated a lot of Tesla's technology, Nikola Tesla's, at a much smaller scale. You remember Tesla had these huge labs, some of them were just over in Colorado Springs. He picked this area because of the altitude, the dryness, for working with electronics. Hutchinson was attempting to reduce this to a smaller scale, and he produced these metal fracture samples where he was able to fracture metal at room temperatures just using electromagnetic energy. And he showed us that you can melt metal at room temperatures purely through using Tesla technology. Tesla used these large pulse discharge devices, slamming electrons into each other. And Hutchinson had a more nuanced electromagnetic approach with machinery. But this is one of the main characteristics that we see around ball lightning. There was a case in the Soviet Union where a ball lightning approached a train and it melted the aluminum frame around the window. And just like John was able to put his finger into this metal at room temperature, this person on the train said they could imprint their thumb into the frame of the aluminum, and it was like putty for a time being. But it's cold, it's not going to burn you, which shows us there's some very interesting energetic effects going on. Shoulders showed us that even at this microscopic scale, by the way, he's a colleague of Hal Puthoff, they were working together for a while, that these plasmas and exotic vacuum objects naturally form vortex structures. And more interestingly, they have a black mode where they become invisible under the microscope. In other words, you're going to see the EVO moving, then it's going to have an invisible form, which we call a black EVO or black ball lightning. And then it's going to show up again and cause effects. So what this shows us is that ball lightning has two modes. It has a visible mode and it has an invisible mode where it could be around you, you don't see it. And he went so far as to say it can form these tendrils, it forms threads, which has led researchers to believe that even things like dark matter and black holes can come in the form not of round objects, but in the shape of threads. And here's a picture of one of those type of electronic threads. But here's something that really got me, looking at some of the topics we're all interested in here. He said one of the things not mentioned is the likelihood of forming totally black organizations with ghostly properties and being able to operate without being able to see them in any presently available way. Okay, so what Shoulders is suggesting based on his electronics research and his work into micro ball lightning and what he called them, and I just have to tell you, everyone who's worked in this area comes up with different names for this. There's EVOs, there's ectons, and just so many different names, but it's all really the same thing. We're talking about different forms of static electricity. Okay, this is, in my view, what we're talking about, a kind of a self-organized static electricity. But what Shoulders is suggesting is within the reality we see around us, all around us right now, there is another reality that's a dark reality with its own energy, its own life forms, and its own technology. And you're not going to be able to detect it. It's not a parallel reality. It's a reality that's enveloped within the visible reality that we see. This is something that Trey and I have been talking about over the past couple of days, but it's around us all the time, but you don't normally interact with it and you don't normally see it. It can form these bead chains. So this is sort of the beginning of these kind of vortex structures. I'll show you more pictures of this in a second. It's just interesting that even though people had different names for this phenomena, they see the same thing under the microscope. It can form these EVOs. These electronic structures can form natural fractal structures, as I said before, these branching structures that look a lot like the structures of nature. This is sort of the natural form of electricity, not the type of structures we see about electricity going down straight wires into mechanically organized technology, organized in a linear fashion. This is the natural form that electricity wants to take, okay? And it doesn't play well with our electronics. Just as an example, back in the 90s when I was studying fractals, on our early, IBM PCs, you had these fractal programs. Even very simply, you could generate fractals just in a few minutes. Kind of example of a fractal type of tree. Just from a basic, simple instruction set, you can generate fractals, showing us that nature has this inherent structure to it. Fractals are objects between dimensions. And that's the important thing about fractals, and this is going to come back in a moment with ball lightning. The definition of fractals are objects between dimensions. Because they keep branching and branching into smaller and smaller branches, they're between 1 and 2 dimensions if they're between a point and a flat surface, or like clouds have a dimension, fractal dimension 2.3. They're between a flat surface and a 3-dimensional object because the closer you look at them, the more space you see. So they're objects between dimensions. Okay. So Shoulders just has a number of interesting things to say about this. He said, looking at these EVOs, at these dark state of these EVOs, he said it might even be appropriate to signify that the black universe identified here is the much touted dark matter regime, which is said to dominate in quantity over our normal matter. Usually scientists put it, there's a ratio of 10 to 1 dark matter to physical matter that we can see. So Shoulders went even so far to say that this sort of these dark plasmoids could be a type of dark matter. And then he goes on even further. He says that they can create their own type of organisms that form at electronic speeds without any mechanical or chemical methods, complex organisms at greatly reduced levels of permittivity. Now, the speed of light, as we've known for hundreds of years, really, since the work of Weber and Kirchhoff and others in the 1840s, 50s, attempting to determine the speed of electromagnetic energy, speed of light. Speed of light's based on permittivity, which is the electrical constant, and permeability, which is the magnetic constant. And if you alter the permittivity or the permeability, the speed of light changes, which means objects that are working with reduced levels of permittivity will increasingly look blurry and look different from objects in our frame of reference. So this is another implication of this EVO research, is that we're surrounded by objects that are operating at a different speed of light and are going to be inherently blurry. Does that sound familiar? Yeah. So basically, what Shoulders is saying to us is that the existence of these dark EVOs creates a type of superconductivity, and he even called it as like a cocoon in which these black ball lightning structures exist within our reality but normally are invisible, which is just something, gives you pause for thought. Might even inspire a book or two. Mm-hmm. So here are some of the characteristics of the consequences of having permittivity transitions from ball lightning is cold electricity, which is electricity, is kind of an alternative type of electricity, black ball lightning, electronic failure, sudden power surges, non-local signals. This is related to the so-called Aronov-Bohm effect, which we can talk about another time, but may explain remote viewing, kind of a non-electromagnetic communications that was speculated about from David Bohm and his mentor Aronov. Actually, they didn't want to let him do this research, but eventually it's now known as the Aronov-Bohm effect. Magnetization of non-magnetic materials, aports, even dark matter life forms, some types of UFOs, and so forth. So basically, there's another universe that we're around, even just from this research alone, from these very well-known government-sponsored researchers that suggest there's another universe right within the boundaries of our own existing universe. So that's one aspect of ball lightning that I want to mention to you. Now, other researchers have made the point that this suggests that the entire universe operates like a fractal. In other words, the same process we see at galactic levels operate on a microscopic level within our bodies, within our biology, within our chemistry. Takaaki Matsumoto, who passed away last year, was a long-time cold fusion researcher. He was actually banned from publishing in the U.S. by fusion magazines because of his interest in ball lightning. But after, he's later vindicated, and now we see him as a major hero in this whole area. He documented this nucleonic transformation right on this cover of the book that was, new versions coming out from Bob Greenyer and MFMP. You can see a pure lead ball creating carbon films out of pure lead, something that shouldn't happen at room temperature, okay? He also documented these micro black holes in the emulsions of his cold fusion LENR experiments, and these vortex-like shapes. He's a very meticulous researcher. When Bob Greenyer and some other people went over to visit him in Japan, they just found meticulous records of all his experiments. He was a very high-level nuclear researcher in Japan who worked in the University of Hokkaido. He documented these vortex-like patterns in these carbon materials and lead exposed to cold fusion LENR experiments. Here's something from the work of Shak Paranov. Shak Paranov was able to generate this ball lightning in a laboratory setting using a Mobius strip. You remember the Mobius strip? It's like a strip where you flip one side over, and it's kind of like one of these Escher-like things where it's continuous. Where you're on one side of the strip, and now you're on the other because it's connected, it's flipped over. He used a Mobius strip with radio frequencies and a lot of electrons to generate this ball lightning. And you can see in the left side here, black ball lightning right in the lab. So this isn't something we're speculating about. Maybe it exists. Is it metaphysics? Is it supernatural? There's a photo of black ball lightning right from Shak Paranov's experiment. Most of this research comes from the Soviet Union and Russia. I'll show you in a minute why it's not public here. But there's black ball lightning. And Shak Paranov also said that they got blue mists coming out of their LENR experiments, and they were always blurry. They could not get photographs because he said the permittivity was oscillating. Once you created this type of structure, the ball lightning, and this is from the work of Dmitry Kolikov, who was replicating this. And it's cool that there are people who have replicated these experiments, that objects that are undergoing this type of process are inherently blurry. Now, how many times have you heard people say, why are the photos of the UFOs so blurry, and how come the Bigfoot photos so blurry, and the ghost photos were blurry, and how come the thing looked blurry? This, I think, is the reason, because it has oscillating permittivity, so its speed of light relative to us. And Einstein did argue in 1909 and 1911, he argued for a variable speed of light. But he was already so well known for this fixed speed of light, he didn't want to rock the boat. But look it up. Einstein had papers about the variable speed of light. It's always constant in our framework, but because the speed of light is so fundamental to electromagnetism, if another object has oscillating permittivity, it's going to be like you're operating at variable speed. So it's going to look strange and blurry to you in your frame of reference. Another feature of ball lightning and this whole genre are these strange tracks. It creates these types of hopping, step-like patterns in film. It can be created from the dust particles, from sand particles that are highly charged, but it's called strange tracks. And I just think it's interesting for some of the topics that some of us study that you get these strange tracks in the lab. It's not just out by Snippy the horse, okay? I don't know if it's connected, but it's interesting, both call them strange tracks. And this is what it looks like. You also get a strange type of radiation, which even Charles C. Barkla, Nobel Prize winner for the discovery of X-rays, I believe in 1907 or so, around that time period, he discovered a type of radiation called J radiation, which didn't come from the K shells, K electron shells, which to this day is still not completely understood, and it has some health effects. It's not completely damaging, but it can be damaging or it can enhance biological activity. So it's another aspect of ball lightning, which is a reason to be careful around it if you're doing experiments. So some of the explanations for ball lightning. One of them is from David Fryberger, who worked at Stanford Linear Accelerator Center under DOE funding again. He said that what we're dealing with ball lightning are alternative Maxwellian arrangements between electricity and magnetism. If you remember from Faraday and later Maxwell kind of clarified what Faraday had discovered with magnetism and electricity, you get electricity and magnetism at right angles. And it radiates outward, which are called open pointing vectors. But Fryberger is that you have closed pointing vectors, which create alternative types of relationships between electricity and magnetism, which he called diality angles. And he believed it creates baryon decay, which means it basically shreds protons and neutrons. And this is why ball lightning has these nucleonic effects, has these sort of strange electromagnetic effects. And he said it's based around another type of structure called the vorton, like a type of magnetism that's in a vortex structure. Again, this is DOE-funded research, so we can't really call this fringe. And Fryberger was invited to some of these conferences at Hessdalen, Norway. Yes, he was one of the researchers there, and he believes that all of these phenomena are what he calls mobile luminous objects. These are self-contained, plasma-driven, he says right here, objects, but they have nucleon decay that's catalyzed by these closed pointing vectors, which is from these vortons, right? And this is what's responsible for earthlights. It's responsible for orbs. It's responsible for ball lightning. And all of these floating, mobile sort of objects that are often mistaken for UFOs. I mean, they are UFOs, but they're not literally, extraterrestrial or other dimensional beings. These are natural objects that arise right from the Earth. And he even was able, using this model, to show why sometimes ball lightning disappears, turns into black ball lightning, or explodes. Okay. Interestingly enough, John Archibald Wheeler at Princeton, who was the mentor to many famous physicists, including Hugh Everett III, that created the original idea for branching parallel realities, Wheeler created a model of this in the 50s of these sort of electrons in a ring structure with the sort of toroidal energy going through the center. He called it a Kugelblitz, which is the German name for ball lightning, and simultaneously black holes. So even going back to the 50s with someone like, mainstream physicists like Wheeler, we have some sort of scientific basis for understanding plasmoids, ball lightning, and black holes and why they're created. Now, a very fascinating explanation for this comes from the work of Zverbelis and Nevesky. You've never heard of them. These were two Soviet researchers. Nevesky was a mathematician, and I believe Zverbelis was a biologist. But Zverbelis happened to come across a KGB experiment that he was invited to observe in a Moscow basement. He said housed a mysterious organization. And by the way, he's able to talk about this because after the Soviet Union fell apart, scientists who are working under non-disclosure agreements could talk about these things because the Soviet Union ceased to exist. And he said this, he observed in this Moscow basement an electromagnetic phantom. He reproduced on the right what it looked like to his eyes. It was rings, wires wrapped in toroids within rings, like multiple, 3 levels, I believe he said, of wires in these toroidal shapes, wires around wires, creating this fractal Maxwellian electromagnetic field structure, which the hallmark is once you turned off this bagel-like structure, the ball lightning remained active in the room for several days. You could measure it with a magnetometer. So it's as if we took all this equipment, turned it off, and the same electronic structure was there in the space that you could measure. It wasn't visible ball lightning, but you could detect it with a magnetometer. He called it an electromagnetic phantom. And he said the basis of it was fractal Maxwellian structures. In other words, instead of this sort of traditional structure that Maxwell talked about with just magnetism, electricity at right angles, what you had instead were a ring of magnetism with a ring of electricity with a smaller ring of magnetism, electricity, all the way down, smaller and smaller and smaller to the 0 point. That's what Cerebralist tells us, all the way to the quantum 0 point. And that's what created these glowing structures, at least visible to their equipment. You removed the equipment and it was still floating over the table, and he said you could kind of brush it away with your hand. He initially thought it was a hoax, and surprisingly, even in the Soviet Union, he couldn't find anyone who was interested in this. They all said, so what? But he linked it back to our DNA, to other spiral structures, and working with Nevesky, they were able to show that the structure, the mathematical structure that explains this is the Koch snowflake, of course, the Koch snowflake fractal. They said this is the most fundamental shape in the universe, the Koch snowflake fractal. The object I studied in my dissertation that I saw in a field as a crop circle the size of a football field is actually the only mathematical structure that permeates all of space, all the way down to the smallest level. So they believe this shape was responsible for this laboratory-produced ball lightning. And even Science Magazine has started to have more articles now about what are called super toroids or hypertoroids, right? And looking at it as the basis for next level information storage devices, biology. So this sort of ring within ring structure is really important. The Czech researcher Pavel Osmira created structures of electrons, not like point-like objects like we've been told, but sort of these ring-like objects, that this is what electrons really look like. They're toroidal-shaped objects that interlink with each other. And I was able to find this last night from a very recent Science article looking at hypertoroids. Hybrid toroids, as they call them. See, once it goes mainstream, we're going to be hearing about this once they have sort of a way to kind of explain it in ordinary language. It's now called a hybrid toroidal vortex. So it's all of a sudden not so fringy, is it? Once it's in Science Magazine. And you can use it for metamaterials and all sorts of interesting electronic properties and so forth. So, dangers of ball lightning. This is something that Anatoly Nikitin has studied. Now, this is very interesting when you look at in this article, which you can find online, is the way that ball lightning interacts with biological materials and metals. Here's a picture of someone's gold necklace turned to ash after they were hit by ball lightning. Okay? Your gold is gone, replaced by ash. How about that for getting ripped off? Now, this guy was lucky because it could do that to your body. Ball lightning is known to completely evaporate liquids very quickly. One was seen going into a bathtub and the water vaporized, not from heat, from electromagnetic energy. Here's a picture. This is from the work of Bogdanovich, and again, thanks to MFMP for putting this together. You can that Bogdanovich and others found that ball lightning could embed itself in metal for 2 days, and it's just living there in metal, waiting to emerge at another time. So it could be around you, and I think this is what we found around the crop circles, why our electronics kept going on the fritz, is it's sort of embedding itself in your electronics and then kind of releasing a huge amount of energy when it dishevels, when it comes apart. On the right, you can see ball lightning going through glass. There's an example right there. The plasmoid has separated, and one is on one side and one is on the other. So this is just very interesting, a look at what ball lightning looks like in the laboratory. And that it just persists, just like Zerverbalist told us. It just keeps going, and you can shut all the equipment off, and it's there. Other people have found it could be embedded for weeks in substances around you without you knowing it. Here's a possible example of a plasmoid going through metal. If this is what it appears to be from MFMP research, Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project, based on the work of Martin Fleischmann, Stanley Pons at the University of Utah, and the so-called cold fusion research, even though we don't call it that anymore. But going through metal. Now, ball lightning is very fast. Here are 25 frames, 1/30th of a second. That's the life of the ball lightning. It might not even be perceptible to your eye. It's going to flash, and then it's gone, all within under a second. So you might not see it. Now, this is consistent with the FBI research into ball lightning. As you know, the FBI came out to Colorado to look at the animal mutilations. And John D'Souza, who you see talking with Dave Paulides, John D'Souza on the right said all they ever saw was a flash and the mutilation that had happened. So if you want to argue that this is evil ETs coming down, they're doing it awfully quick because it's just a flash of light. So D'Souza said they couldn't figure it out. It's just a flash of light. All I want to point out here is that's consistent with ball lightning. It's a flash of light. Sometimes it persists for seconds, minutes. The Canadian photo I showed you, that's a video from that Canadian ball lightning from a few weeks ago. Sometimes it persists for a while, but sometimes it's just a brief flash. And that's what they saw around the animal mutilations in Colorado. There have been Air Force studies of ball lightning. This is from J. Reese Roth, started in 1993. Ball lightning, what nature is trying to tell the plasma research community. And Roth found that 1 out of 20 Americans have seen ball lightning. I guess I'm one of them, but I saw it in the UK. I saw one up in the sky that lasted for about half a minute, and one on the ground that looked like a luminous blue grapefruit. And there was someone else with me just in a field overlooking Alton Barns, looking over a crop circle area. And that was really quick. It was just it looked almost like someone had turned a burner on, a gas burner, but it didn't. There was no singeing on the grass. So it's consistent with this research. Anyway, Roth in this article attempts to quantify the energy potential of ball lightning, 20,000 joules per cubic centimeter. It's a lot, which he said is something like 10 times that of TNT. Again, 1 out of 20 people in the U.S. have seen it, and so forth. And then at the end it says sponsored by, in part to U.S. Air Force. Now, a more recent research is Eric Davis, same Eric Davis from the Davis-Wilson notes that we heard about a number of years ago. Again, sponsored by Edwards Air Force Base, attempting to look at ball lightning and quantify the energy available, potential technological applications, and so forth. Now, the interesting thing about this article is it's redacted even in the beginning, right? In the abstract at the bottom. They're looking for explanations of ball lightning, and they go into alternative explanations. It's starting to get good here, guys. Atmospheric maser cavitons. Masers are naturally forming microwave, self-contained, glowing type objects that cut like lasers. Masers have a cutting action. So that's a possibility. Then we get to electromagnetic vortex plasmoids. That's not, we're getting hot here. And then finally we get to a third concept is blank. Program the Air Force funded in 1950s, 60s. So is that Winston Bostick propulsion? Well, Bostick was interested, by the way, in getting to Mars in 16 hours using plasmoids as a propulsion source. But so right here, we see that there is classification going on with ball lightning, which we know is just a natural phenomenon, but the Air Force has, found a way. I would imagine this is either weaponization or propulsion. That particular classification number relates to classification of facilities. Am I right? Trey, B3? Yeah. So you find this throughout the article. The person who's the project manager is Franklin B. Meade, who is all over these advanced Air Force projects. So Davis talks about these masers triggering ball lightning related to microwaves and so forth. So this is one. Going back to the work of Kapitsa, who was a Soviet researcher Paul Dirac used to correspond with over at Cambridge. So here are masers produced just recently in the laboratory, 2019 work of Slobodan Stankovic with MFMP. This is a maser cutting metal. So this type of process, a maser is like a microwave equivalent of a laser, a focused microwave emission. It can cut metal like this. So it can also exist naturally. And an interesting aspect of this is when you start looking into this research, and this is from New Energy Times. By the way, this is what masers look like. This is on Saturn. You can see at the poles, you get these naturally occurring kind of structures from masers. These are just occurring in the atmosphere naturally. But an interesting aspect of this research is it just starts getting more and more redacted. This is the end of Eric Davis's paper. We wanted to read the whole thing. I was getting interested. You kind of hooked me with electromagnetic vortex plasmoids there. But we don't see anything. Where did it go? And even the distribution list at the bottom of each page, it says redacted. We don't even know who saw this paper because the distribution list is redacted. So my point here is that I think there is ball lightning research going on like there was in the Soviet Union and Russia, but it became classified starting with Winston Bostick in the 50s since it had to do with propulsion and weaponization. And this is what Ross goes into, by the way, in the previous article, is all the weaponization potential of ball lightning, of course, that you could be used to melt metal, directed at enemy troops and all these sorts of things. So here we have this other article I want to show you from a Fusion New Energy magazine. At the end of this article about creating fusion power from Buckminster fullerenes, these are kind of the Buckminster Fuller 60-sided, those shapes that he was famous for making. Someone found a way to generate plasmoids from that shape. And at the very end of the article, it says, at press time, we've received information that the patent application has been bucked up to DOD for classification review. And we never heard about it again. So all of this information, in my view, is getting sucked in to these classified programs. And those folks can't talk about it again. So this is why ball lightning, as I'm presenting this to you, a lot of it seems new and it seems a little kind of confusing and so forth, is because the full discussion of this is in black budget programs, if they're even talking about it, if they can talk to each other. It's not in the realm of public discussion. We can see it just from these examples right here. By the way, Franklin B. Meade, who sponsored a lot of Eric Davis' research and was the sponsor on that ball lightning paper, later went to work for Kepler Aerospace, who says in their public disclosures that they were interested in creating propulsion systems to Mars. So the issue for me here is that you have research being funded by the public, being classified by the Air Force in this case, and then the people who were those project managers later go work for private aerospace companies working on the same thing that Winston Bostic was interested in, and it's all been classified, and now we don't have access to talk about it, which is what's holding back our own technological development in our own country right now, in my view. So this shows us the U.S. government has a lot of interest in this whole subject matter, from plasmas to plasmoids. I've talked to people that have worked at DOE on plasmas about this. But it's sort of gone into black budget programs, and then the people that worked in those programs now are working for aerospace companies, and we're still not getting public. It's been privatized. This should not be privatized. This is how nature works. Here's another example, Proton 21 Labs from Kyiv, Ukraine. They were a company that did something like, I believe, 8,000 cold fusion LENR experiments where they created nuclear synthesis. They said they created every element in the periodic table, just starting with ordinary metals. Stanislav Adamenko and Vysotsky. And the program was purchased by DOE, sent to Fermi Labs. All 100 employees came over from Ukraine, and then it went to Oak Ridge, and the website was taken offline, and the program went black. So if cold fusion LENR is this sort of pathological fringe science, why is DOE buying cold fusion LENR companies in Ukraine and absorbing them into the U.S. fusion program? This is the old Proton 21 Lab site. It's still online. The newer one's gone. So this just shows us that what we have here is a whole research area that is somehow off limits. It's either with private aerospace companies or it's at DOE. Okay? And that's why we don't know very much about it. Or we're learning it this way, research study by research study. So what is the evidence that cold fusion, ball lightning is related to lab-produced plasmoids? Well, if you look at the photos from Hessdalen, Norway, and you look at some of these lab-produced experiments, it just looks like the same track alike there. You get the same M&M formation in the plasmoids as it's spiraling through the air. There's a picture at the bottom of ball lightning photographed on the Australian outback, and then the work of Michael Solon, who got a patent in 2001 for some of these processes. But it looks like the same pattern when you look at it visually. Project Hessdalen. So people thought these were UFOs. I think these are mobile luminous objects, mobile ball lightnings. Again, lab produced, and what we see in a macroscopic level looks to me like the same sort of thing. Okay. There is a way to verify this if we had the research. There are these things called crenulated iron-rich spheres that you see around ball lightning impact sites. I would be curious if this was seen near Snippy. If we didn't have the equipment back then to do this, but if you looked at the soils, would you find these impact objects, the crenulated iron-rich spheres? You find them sometimes in micrometeorites, and you find them around ball lightning. It looks like the same sort of thing. It doesn't seem to be from the meteorite. It seems to be from the impact of the energy impacting the soil. So there is some evidence. We would also see evidence of transmutation, like these Takaaki Matsumoto experiments, where you have a carbon spray coming out of a lead ball, right? This would have made Isaac Newton very happy to see this. Mark Leclerc produced this through another process that produces microball lightning cavitation, where you put a lot of energy into a liquid, it forms bubbles, and then the bubbles collapse with tremendous force, kind of like the pistol shrimp, that shrimp that lives at the bottom of the ocean that paralyzes its prey with sound. If you look it up, it's using a type of cavitation. As the bubbles collapse, it creates these stunning, explosive types of impacts that paralyze their prey. Well, Mark Leclerc was able to also create nucleosynthesis. I saw him give a lecture about this in Boulder here a number of years ago at the Breakthrough Energy Conference. So more evidence that this is in the private sector. Lockheed Martin generating coherent matter wave beams. They said that they were able in this patent to create coherent matter, correlated matter, with any type of particle, not just bosons, which normally come together, bosonic types of particles, but even electrons, fermions, They could do it at any temperature, not just really cold temperatures like the Bose-Einstein condensate that was, created in Boulder in 1995. They could do it at room temperature and create, action at a distance, energy weapons, weaponization of this whole technology. But this is all part of the same genre, since we believe that ball lightning is a type of coherent matter. Again, one stage of matter past plasmas. And they go into the different effects. But it's basically creating coherent matter. What this is like, an analogy, is you've seen murmurations of birds across the sky. You can see this often in the Midwest if you're driving to the Midwest, where you see huge flocks of birds and they all kind of turn at once, like a huge wave-like pattern, or flocks of fish. That's the analogy that Lockheed Martin uses in explaining what coherent matter is. It's where the matter behaves like a wave. The particles have lost their individuality and it behaves sort of like one object, a coherent object. That's coherent matter. And it seems in ball lightning that the energy there and the particles are sort of behaving more like a resonant wave-like process than like individual particles, at least temporarily, which allows it to generate a lot of energy and create particular quantum effects. And this is what they talk about in the Lockheed patent. So in this movie that you can see online, it was created by the U.S. government in the 70s. It had Jacques Vallée in it. UFOs, Past, Present, and Future. The initial name was UFOs, It Has Begun. It was a real disclosure movie funded by DOD, NASA, Edwards Air Force Base. Edwards Air Force Base went to Robert Emenegger, and someone who had worked with Richard Nixon on his media team, and they created this movie, which later had Jacques Vallée, and it included the cattle mutilations from this area in the second version of the movie. It was going to be released in movie theaters, and for some reason, a few weeks before it's scheduled to go into movie theaters in the 70s for the whole U.S. population to see, it was a very straightforward movie about UFOs. There was no laughing or giggling or making fun of the subject. It was filmed in the Pentagon. It's online on YouTube. Right now, you can still see it. They pulled it, and it never was shown in movie theaters, and it went dark after months and months and months of work. But they had these photos of these objects. They sent a team out here, and this is what they saw over this area, which to me looks a lot like the Hessdalen lights and all the other Earth lights that we've seen today. Even formed these toroidal shapes. They said in the movie these are UFOs. I don't think these are they're not like ET UFOs. They're not reverse engineered craft. These are plasma phenomena, in my view, coherent plasma phenomena like we've been looking at throughout this lecture. Just like at Hessdalen, it's the same sort of thing, right? Yep. So even this object photographed over Hessdalen by Massimo Teodorani, a ball lightning researcher who created the term, by the way, overlapping phenomenology. This is considered to be ball lightning. This is not a triangular craft. I know it looks like a structured craft. You think we're seeing a UFO. This is ball lightning in the view of these researchers. That's why. So, by the way, even researchers like Bychkov from Russia, Biel Bychkov, Teodorani, and so forth, say we can't quite tell the difference between UFOs and ball lightning. It's a continuum. Just some more examples before we close today. And it looks like we'll have some time for questions. Ted Phillips researched Marley Ranch out in Missouri. Another hotspot like Skinwalker Ranch, like Elbert County Rocky Mountain Ranch, which we've heard Katie Page talk about and so forth. It's the same thing. They called these the ambers. And it looks just like the Hessdalen lights and the other types of mobile luminous objects. Browns Mountain, right? Was it North Carolina? I just happened to be sitting next to in a restaurant in Boulder, Colorado. Started talking to somebody. I was curious what I did, and he said, "Oh, I'm near Browns Mountain in North Carolina. We have these lights all the time. The Marfa lights in Texas, same sort of phenomena." Now, Ted Phillips was able to document the same sort of things we see at Skinwalker Ranch, anti-gravity effects, which might explain the classification for ball lightning in some of these research papers. Anti-grav, yes, that word. Lifted up picnic tables as the orbs went over the picnic tables, right? You could see why the Air Force might be interested in this. There was a case where the rancher went by their favorite prize horse. A few minutes later, he came back, and it had been completely blown up and was splattered all over the wall. Hope there are no kids listening right now. So they have a grenade-like explosive power. Calves were completely stripped of flesh with burn marks. Sounds familiar, right? Even Colares Island in Brazil, which Hal Podolf has talked about, are these UFOs? Are these ball lightning plasma type objects? It's a very strange case. There were people injured, people killed. Colares Island, Brazil, you can look it up. The Brazilian military got involved, Operation Plato, but these to me look plasma-like in my view. So when we look at Snippy the horse, and again, thanks to Joe and Harry for sharing their information, Joe being an original witness who, was at Adams State University, and we were talking, listening to this image really looks to me, and I could be wrong, as if some sort of energy from above literally melted the flesh and the skin into the ground. Because talking to Joe, he said it wasn't like a powder, like a carbon powder like you see in these LENR experiments. It was more kind of a little gooey, like a flesh-like material that had melted or something.
Like a drying mud.
Like a drying mud. Right here. This looks to me plasma-related in that sense. Some other pictures from Tony and Katie's new book, which I encourage you all to read, Snippy the Horse. These photos from one of the witnesses from around that time period that they took from, I think, the sand dunes or something. This looks like ball lightning to me. These two photos, the original way it looked, and then the movement looks like Hessdalen lights and mobile luminous objects, what David Fryberger is talking about. Ball lightning. So my guess, possibly what happened to Snippy, and we were talking about this yesterday, this is my idea, because there was a 75-foot grass circle found nearby and what looked like exhaust marks, is this something like a Travis Walton case where it's an accident, where a craft lands and there's a discharge of static? Because Travis Walton said recently at the Phenomicon conference in Vernal last year in 2024 that he doesn't think what happened to him was intentional. He said he was a dummy for going up and touching the craft, and he thinks from the craft going over the treetops, it built up a lot of electrostatic charge, and he was inadvertently zapped. And my idea here would be that it was an accident from the craft. It wasn't an intentional action, but it led to a plasmoid ball lightning type discharge, which, as we've seen, is very powerful and can transmute materials. Exsanguinate objects, instantly evaporate liquids. As we were told, there was no liquids in the brain cavity and so forth. This is just my thinking about Snippy. I mean, there could be other explanations, but this is my thinking about Snippy based on what I know about ball lightning. So final observation here is, why do we get these paranormal hotspots? Skinwalker Ranch, Marley Ranch, Rocky Mountain Ranch, and then East-Eddy Ranch in Washington, and even the San Luis Valley here, the King Valley Ranch, what happened to Snippy and the other animals around that same time period. There are certain types of soils that are naturally conducive to electrostatic charge. Skinwalker Ranch, before it was known by as Skinwalker Ranch, was a famous asphalt mining site because there's lots of gilsonite. And I brought a sample here, which I'll get in a moment, of gilsonite. It's a dark, black, very lightweight rock, which is an excellent insulator. And if you look it up, yes, on ChatGPT, what you're told about gilsonite is it's highly susceptible to static charge. And as Ken Shoulder showed us, all you need is charge separation and some insulation, and then some way that the charges come together to create exotic vacuum objects, ball lightning, micro ball lightning, and so forth. So gilsonite would be a source of ball lightning. And in this area, we have silica from the sand, which is also highly subject to static charge. When you put static charges together in ways that creates a confinement and creates a kind of coherent energy process, in other words, the static would come together in a very rapid way or be confined to a smaller space, you're going to generate coherent matter, which generates ball lightning. So what do we get when we get ball lightning? We're going to get other types of phenomena that normally don't fit into our reality, which is what I believe Ken Shoulders called black organizations with ghostly properties. And let me just give you one example before we go. This is from the movie A Flash of Beauty, Paranormal Bigfoot. There's this example of Harold and Cody in Cokeville, Oregon, who they're not sure what they're looking at. It's in the distance as they're coming up this road. And you can see this on YouTube or in the Flash of Beauty Paranormal Bigfoot movie. I'm in it for a few minutes talking about these concepts. They see what they think is an elk standing up. As they get closer, they see it's a big, hairy, ape-like creature that turns into a glowing orange cube. We're not even Bigfoot believers. They see this. That then turns into an orb and shoots off into the forest. And they had an artist, Jose, draw the full sequence of events. They see something, they think, what is it? An elk on two legs? It turns into a Bigfoot. Looks like a Bigfoot, they realize it. It hunches down. They said the legs come up, the hands come down. It turns into a glowing orange cube, as Harold said, as bright as the sun. I encourage you to watch the movie yourself. It's on all streaming services, which then shoots off into the forest. So, is there a cryptid ball lightning plasmoid connection? Yes, I think just from the evidence of witnesses alone. And again, if you start doing your research in these topics, you'll find there are very many witnesses to these. Go to conferences about Bigfoot and related phenomena, and you will talk to people who want to share their stories who've seen this with their own eyes. So again, going back to the discussion I had with Trey about the normalcy bias, hidden events, the flat lens slot, whatever you want to call it, these phenomena exist around us, people experience it, and we're often reluctant to talk about it for a variety of reasons. The same way people are reluctant for many years, hopefully it's changing now, to talk about UFO pilots talking about UFO sightings and so forth. So again, to summarize, I think that there's a dark matter fractal universe around us that we don't perceive it. We're busy people, we're focused on what we're doing, but it's here. And it's in some places more than others, probably due to the proclivity of some types of soils and rock formations to create the conditions for static, electrostatic charges, and charge clusters leading to ball lightning. And it's around our other ordinary linear universe. Now you see, of course, AI didn't call it a dark matter universe, they called it a bark matter universe. And since I have a dog, I kind of agree. Maybe it's a bark matter universe. Maybe someone can fix AI someday and it'll actually spell things correctly. Sorry. Sam Altman, maybe you can fix that. But in any case, so thank you. Any questions? Thanks for listening. Now let me find my piece of gilson. Go ahead.
Yeah. Hold on, let me get the mic over to you. Who was talking?
Thank you. Is there any similarity in the danger between white and dark?
No, that's a good question. It seems to be in the book Skinwalkers at the Pentagon by James Lukatsky and Knapp and Colm Kelleher. They talk about some of these DIA analysts going out to Skinwalker Ranch and encountering what seems to me like black ball lightning. Now, I've talked to Jay Stratton about this, and he didn't totally agree with me that it was. It was something that's dark, that our brain interprets it as dark. And it created a fear-like response in them, similar to what people experience around cryptids, including Bigfoot and other types of creatures, like this extreme fear response that we have. So in my reading of the literature, the types of ball lightning that seem to be dangerous are usually the visible white type. But the dark shapes have their own physiological effect on us that doesn't seem as immediately dangerous, but it has a physiological effect. And I'm suggesting here that it does. There are other types of phenomena, life associated with that could have their own effects too. But the meeting, I think the direct answer to your question is it seems like the white ball lightning seems to be more potentially destructive than the dark type.
And one other question. We've all seen the video of orbs creating crop circles.
Yeah.
And if that's ball lightning, wouldn't that integrate intelligence?
Right. That particular video, I think that particular video is animation. Having talked to the person that filmed that worked at an animation studio in London. It's not your fault that you understand it because people are promoting that. When ball lightning is seen around crop circles, it doesn't seem to be moving a lot. It just sort of seems to be there, and then the grass flattens out. I've talked to witnesses who've seen this happen around UFOs. It wasn't literally crop circles, but I've talked to people that have seen flying discs. This case happened in Usk, Washington in the 70s where she said it flattened the meadow. And I said, how flat? She said, flat as a pancake. So there are examples of UFOs flattening wheat. And there are, if you look at that book, The Secret History of Crop Circles, which I mentioned last year when I was talking here by Terry Wilson. You can still get copies of it. He goes through hundreds of historical cases of crop circles going back way into the past. And there are cases of people seeing plasmoids, ball lightning around where crop circles were later found. So there is a correlation, but that particular video I don't think is actually a real video of actual ball lightning creating. It's sort of a kind of a presentation of what it might look like. Yeah.
We have a question here.
My question is that you were talking about connecting metals.
Yes.
So what about the people that have titanium implants?
Yes. Yes, it's been known to melt metal in people. I'm not sure about medically implanted devices, but it can. There's a lot of experiments with titanium and other metals where they just either shear off. And by the way, those fence posts were wooden by Snippy, right? We did have we read about in the Snippy book from Katie and Tony that the fence posts were sheared off. I mean, this is one of the properties of ball lightnings, and it cuts like a laser. But yeah, it does. If you look at the Anatoly Nicotine article, which is online about the dangers of ball lightning, he describes many cases where it melts people's bracelets. Rings instantaneously disappear. I'm not sure if people with metal implants, what it might do, but I mean, even in the Lakatsky book, they talk about orbs going through people, so we don't really know, but it's definitely a good question. It's a good question.
Did anybody else have anything? I have a quick question for
Sure.
you. In your research, has anybody come across any measurements of the power of the explosion? Measured the output of ball lightning occurring naturally, and have they tried to guesstimate the potential output of what could be? And last, do you think that there's actual research going on in the deliverability of ball lightning?
Yeah, no, those are good questions, Eric. Yeah. So I think in the J. Reese Roth article, which I showed from the mid-90s, he was attempting to get an estimate of the power potential of ball lightning. And he, as I said there, he said it was 20,000 joules per centimeter cubed, which is a lot. He said that's 10 times the power of TNT. Other people estimated it as the power of a hand grenade. And this is obviously why, to me, the whole subject became classified. Even though people see it from time to time, the lab research is classified because it's weaponizable. And I think there were some examples of this being used in, was it in Iraq, where there were talks about electricity bombs or something? So if it's been weaponized, we don't know about it, but the challenge would be to deliver it. Because as you know, ball lightning, you read these accounts, it sort of bounces around, it goes down the aisle of the plane, passes right through the hull. And it seems to sort of do what it wants, following these static gradients. Now, I can't discount the idea that there's some sort of consciousness involved with this, just because talking to witnesses who've encountered ball lightning, it seems to like follow them around, and then you're getting into the areas of orbs which have intentionality. But I think it fits my idea here that it links us to another type of reality where life forms could, well, they get energy from thermal vents in the sea way down there. Why wouldn't you have life forms also getting energy from this type of structure? So there may be some intentionality and consciousness involved with this. So the question, Eric, would be, how would you be able to deliver it the way Eric Davis and Roth talk about, the way it seemed the Air Force wanted to be able to deliver it, is something that could be projected over there to the other guys, troops and equipment and so forth. But since it's classified, we don't know. But that's a good one. But it does seem to have a lot of power. And this is why it's related to the whole area of cold fusion LENR. Because Matsumoto concluded that what we called cold fusion, Fleischmann and Pons called cold fusion, now called low energy nuclear reaction, now sometimes called coherent energy transformation, is nothing more than micro ball lightning working within a metal lattice. That's all it is. And it seems to be connecting and liberating a huge amount of energy, what's called excess heat. And if that can become a sustainable process, you'd have active matter that was generating more output than the input. And this is what Proton 21 Labs said that they had created. Also, I didn't mention here in detail Alexander Parkhomov, who created a reactor that went for 225 days. Now, recently, Google attempted to replicate the Parkhomov 225-day reactor. And despite spending, I think, upwards of $20 million, you could check me on this, on the project, they couldn't do it. And when I asked people who knew Alexander Parkhomov, what did Google not do? They didn't completely do it exactly the way he did it. And we've learned from these researchers, Vittorio Violante from ENEA in Italy gave us a lecture at the SSE meeting in San Francisco in 2015. He says it's a very finicky reaction. I think this goes back to your question about ball lightning and the reliability of it. It's a very finicky reaction. He said sometimes it would take weeks for the reaction to start generating excess heat. Who has that type of patience nowadays to wait for weeks? And I'm told that Google, when they attempted to replicate Parkhomov, didn't do it exactly the way he did it, and so they didn't get his results. In fact, they didn't get any results. But Parkhomov, still alive, was one of the top Soviet, nuclear researchers. And we know he was able to replicate, create it for a good part of a year. So ball lightning, the whole area, cold fusion LENR, coherent energy transformations, it seems to be very finicky, which is why you're wondering, how come we don't have a generator here, a little tabletop generator with a little ball lightning in there, and it's generating all the energy we need for this conference? We wouldn't need that noisy generator. It's very finicky. It's got to be done just right to get it to self-sustain. People can get it going for a few hours, Fleischmann and Pons, maybe a couple days, maybe a week, maybe like Parkhomov, 225 days. It really does seem to be a real reaction, but you have to it's a resonant reaction. It's more akin to music than to chemistry, I would say. And so all the notes have to be just right. It's like an orchestra. And when you get it just right, it seems to get the reaction going. So I don't know if the military has been able to weaponize it or not. It's a good open question and something we should be interested in.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Yes, one more.
The temperatures can.
Sir, hold on, let me get your mic.
Temperatures can be both cold and hot.
Yeah. It depends what state that the plasmoid is in, but going back to Gerald Pollack's work on self-organized water, it's very akin to a tornado vortex type structure, the only structure that we know about in nature that creates negative entropy. There's something called the vortex cooling effect. You've heard about this. Pollack talks about it. He said they verified it at UW. That vortex of water going down your tub sucks in heat from the environment and cools the environment it's in. And I think this is one of the reasons why around paranormal, what we call paranormal phenomena, you often get a cooling effect, is because what we're calling paranormal phenomena are based on vortex plasmoids as a type of energy structure just like a tornado, they suck in heat from the environment, and this is why ball lightning seems to be cooler than its environment. There may be a lot of energy, but it's converting the heat to electricity. That's what Winston Bostwick was attempting to do, was to create electricity from fusion. And this is, to me, and Trey and I have talked about this a lot, why you get this cooling effect around Bigfoot and Bigfoot sightings, why the witnesses say the area became suddenly cool right before they had the sighting. It becomes suddenly silent. You get some of these electromagnetic changes around these types of creatures, also around what we call haunted sites, ghost sightings. Even talking to the paranormal rangers, who are going to talk in a few minutes, Stanley was telling me last night that some of the rooms he went in on these investigations were surprisingly cool, more than they should have been. So there seems to be a cooling effect from that vortex shape, which you can even document from vortex-shaped water. Thank you. One more question, Trey, and then we're going to...
Well, it's a statement.
Good.
I did go back
Good.
and dig into the Freedom of Information Act, exemption B3.
Yes.
That specifically is an exemption based on existing U.S. statute. And so probably your common culprits in that are the Internal Security Act of 1955 and the Atomic Energy Act.
Right. There you go.
So that's probably what's causing your redaction.
Fascinating. Thank you. Well, thanks very much, folks.
Round of applause.
And